Thank you everybody for coming here tonight. My name is David Smith with the Chicago Department of Transportation. Welcome everybody and thank you to Ms. Recordia for hosting the meeting. I'm going to say a couple of words real quick and then we'll move on through the agenda and eventually get to an open house where you can talk directly with folks from CDOT about the project that we're talking about on Granville. So why are we here? We're here to talk with you guys about your experiences, the observations that we've had, the conversations we've had with neighbors around traffic safety on Granville and in the larger neighborhoods surrounding Granville. And we're really, when we talk about the project, we're talking about a long segment, almost 3 miles from Kedzie all the way to Sheridan. And so this whole project, we're really looking at this as one connected project, one project where we're creating a network of safe streets, accessible streets that are designed to facilitate everybody, regardless of your age, your ability, or your mode of transportation. It's critically important that we have a city where everybody can get around safely, get around efficiently and comfortably, and we need to make sure that our friends, our family, our neighbors get home safely. And Granville is a very interesting street. It's very much a community street. It connects to multiple schools. There's 4 schools along the corridor. Connects to multiple parks, to public transit at the Red Line, just a couple of blocks from the brand new Peterson Metro Station, which is a huge asset for the neighborhood. Connects to local businesses, connects to the trail system at the North Shore Channel Trail on the west, in terms of a bicycle connection to Kenmore and Winthrop, which gets you to and from the Lakefront Trail. So this really is a community street, and if you live in the neighborhood, there's a good chance that you're using the street for some part of your journey, whether that be on foot, getting your kid to school, riding a bike, driving your car. Granville is an important street for the neighborhood. But when we look at what's happening on Granville, it's pretty astounding. And we will provide a whole lot of information tonight in terms of the number of traffic crashes and the traffic safety concerns that we have on Granville within your community. When you start looking at the number of traffic crashes that are happening on Granville, it's by far greater than any other residential street within the area. It's not even close. And so we'll have a lot of information supporting that. But it is critically important from our perspective that we address those issues and make Granville a safer, more accessible street for the community. So the project goals are really these 4 main points. Reducing the number of non-local vehicle trips. A lot of people are driving on Granville and using it as an alternative to some of the busier streets that connect through. This can be a real challenge for the neighborhood, especially considering that you've got 4 schools, multiple parks, access to public transportation, people riding bicycles, people walking in the neighborhood, people going to local businesses. To have the volume of traffic on Granville is presenting some real challenges. And a lot of that is generated from people who live outside of the neighborhood. And we'll talk about that in some of the traffic crash statistics as well. Who's involved with traffic crashes. You really see the number of people who don't live in the neighborhood showing up in some of those data points. The second goal is to encourage slower and more predictable speeds. There's some real issues around speeding. We've got some info on this, 50 miles plus along Granville, and not just at 2 in the morning, but during, please. All right, stop. Okay, so guys, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna talk, we're gonna give a presentation, and then we're gonna have a lot of opportunity for dialogue back and forth. But if we just start yelling out, it's not gonna go very smoothly and we're not gonna be efficient here, okay? So there'll be a lot of information. Slow and predictable speeds is critically important for everybody. We see people driving 50 miles plus on Granville. We see people blowing through stop signs on Granville. This cannot happen. This isn't acceptable for the community. Better organizing Granville. Right now, it's a 3-mile street that's two-way for the entire way. It's a residential street. That's the formal designation. It's a local residential street. You don't have many residential streets in Chicago 3 miles long with two-way designations. You've got schools with pickup and drop-off operations all over the place. You've got busy intersections, Clark Street, Broadway, Western Avenue. So part of this project is to better organize the street, give everyone a better sense of where they should be and how they should act. And then enhancing accessibility, making sure that people of all modes of transportation, all ability levels and all ages can get around the community, use Granville as an asset, and get where they need to go safely. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce our elected officials who are here tonight. Then we're going to, my colleague Brad Huff from CDOT is going to give a presentation. We'll talk through all the information. Then we're going to break up into the open house where we've got poster boards and everything. We've got about a dozen or more staff from CDOT here to talk with you guys, answer all your questions. We've got the exhibits broken out by different segments of Granville, so if you're interested in a particular area of Granville, you can go right to that area. Everybody from CDOT, just about everybody except myself, has a name tag on. I will put one on, but anybody with the name tag is from CDOT, and we're here to help, and we want to get feedback from you. This project spans across 3 wards, the 40th Ward, Alderman Vasquez, 48th Ward, Alderwoman Hoppenworth, 50th Ward, Alderman Silverstein, and then in the 7th District as well, the state, we have our state senator, Mike Simmons. So I think we'll give a couple minutes for the elected officials to just address you guys. Start with Senator.
Hi, everybody. I'm State. Oh, sorry.
Come on. Got a brick wall.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm State Senator Mike Simmons. I represent the 7th District, which covers Edgewater, Andersonville, Uptown, Rogers Park, Lincoln Square, North Center. I'm here to hear what neighbors have to say about the project. I serve on the Senate Transportation Committee, which doesn't have official jurisdiction over this route, just to be clear. But again, just want to hear what neighbors are saying and want to learn more about what priorities are for safer roads. So thanks for having me here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Alderperson Andre Vasquez, 40th Ward. Before I get started, really quickly, if you aren't signed up for any of the newsletters, 40, 48, or 50, can you put a hand up real quick? Great. We're going to need you guys to sign up. I really love the turnout here. So whether it was the yard signs or email or whatever, we want to make sure people stay informed as we have this meeting and future ones to come. I'll say that when the department reached out to us, really expressing what some of the concerns have been as far as safety, some of the things that I believe they'll show you in the slides are pretty compelling as to really how bad it is. I don't know if some of y'all know, but about this past week, we actually had a cyclist get hit on Ravenswood in Granville. And so we're still, didn't get too many details on how they're doing. But it was serious enough that it showed up on the Citizen app for those of you who may have it. So we want to make sure that whatever is done here takes into account the infrastructure and also behavior of drivers. So as you all who may not live on Granville and feel like you might be affected based on changes, we want to hear that feedback. We want you to write those down so we can take all that into account. Because even when you start out with the best of intention, you want to make sure you hear all the details to see any adjustments that may need to get made. So that input is going to be very important to us. As we continue conversations after this meeting, please reach out. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Lenny Hoppenworth, the alderperson of the 48th Ward.
Hi everyone, Lenny Hoppenworth, Alderwoman of the 48th Ward, which is Edgewater and Uptown. So the part of Granville between Clark Street and the lakefront. And the biggest priority I just want to stress is that this is about safety, about your safety, and especially about folks that are older adults, our students who use Granville, no matter how you get around. And that includes if you walk, if you bike, or if you drive. And infrastructure is one way that we're going to get there. I want to shout out to our late Alderwoman Marianne Smith, who recently passed, and she served the Edgewater area for 24 years, and she's known as the infrastructure alderperson because she was one of the first to start building speed bumps and also traffic circles. And those are the kinds of things that she implemented because she heard from the community that they did not want to be a cut-through neighborhood for cars, and they wanted to be safe crossing their streets. So this is a continuation of that conversation. You are the most important part of this conversation, so thank you for being here. And I'll introduce Alderwoman Deborah Silverstein from the 50th.
Good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? Good. This is wonderful that there's so many of you here. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are in the 50th? In the 50th ward? Okay, great. Thanks for coming tonight. This proposal really only affects the 50th ward at Granville and Western, so I just have one intersection in this whole proposal. But as the alderman, I really want to hear your feedback. I want to know whether this is something that you think is going to be a good thing or something that you're have some concerns about, because I need to hear from you so that I can take that back to CDOT. So please let us know. I have two staff here. I have Marlene here and I have Keith here. So those of you in the 50th, or anybody can talk to us really, but those in the 50th, make sure you connect with us and let us know how you're feeling about this. We can always tweak it if we have to. We can talk to CDOT about your concerns. So thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks to Ms. Recordia, and I'm going to pass it back to CDOT.
Thank you to all our elected officials. Thanks to all of you for coming. My name is Brad Huff from CDOT, the Chicago Department of Transportation. Before I get started on the presentation, we've got a lot of folks here and a lot of people still standing. If you've got an empty seat by you, could you just raise your hand? And if you're standing and would like a seat, please feel free to take a seat. All right. You guys can hear me all right? Awesome. Excellent. So, Dave from CDOT, all the elected officials, they kind of gave a bit of the overview about why exactly we're here. So, what I want to do is a couple of things. One, I want to dive into all the things that we've found on Granville. And then I want to get into a little bit of the details about exactly what our proposal is. And then after that presentation, you're going to be able to talk to all of our colleagues over here, and really that's where we'll be able to best answer your questions and best kind of explain exactly what it is we are and are not proposing. So when we dive into Granville, the first thing that pops up to us is that Granville really accounts for a large number, a disproportionately large share of crashes on streets on the neighborhood, but also compared to other neighborhood streets within the entire city. And so as I go through a lot of this data that we've collected, I just want to highlight that we've taken a really data-driven approach to our analysis. All of this crash data has been reported to us from the Illinois Department of Transportation. We've looked at 5 years of crash data. We've conducted traffic counts, speed counts at over 20 intersections within the neighborhood along and nearby Granville. Our staff has been out there conducting hours of observations, just looking at behavior along the street. And we've had a lot of discussions with folks, block clubs, schools, other stakeholders along the corridor. So first, when we start from a really high level, when we look citywide, what our team has done is analyzed every single local neighborhood residential street in the city. And what we found is that Granville, basically all of Granville, that whole 3 miles, basically pops up in the top 10% of residential streets with traffic crashes. These are traffic crashes per mile. And then when we look at 5%, nearly half of the blocks on Granville are still falling within that top 5% of traffic crashes on local neighborhood streets.
Can you explain when you say traffic crashes? Are you talking car on car, car on bike, bike on bike?
All of it. Any of it. Those are.
Breakdown beyond that level?
We do have some information on different types of traffic crashes.
Do you have that here tonight?
We have that.
What do you call a residential street, by the way?
Residential streets are formally designated as local residential streets. They're basically the non-arterials. They're the ones that are providing access to homes. So, and I have a map again that I will get into that shows all the local streets in the neighborhood.
Don't we have something call it Collector Street?
We do. Granville is not a collector street. And so when you look at the 1% of residential streets within the city, you can see on the north side, really the only street that pops up is Granville. There's a handful of blocks on Granville within the top 1% of traffic crashes on local non-arterial neighborhood streets. And over the last 5 years, we've seen 660 total crashes on Granville, and over 180 people have been injured in those crashes. And we look into where those crashes are happening. They're happening everywhere on that 3 miles, especially at the major intersections, but they are happening in between, and really on every single block we're seeing traffic crashes over and over again. Now, when you compare, so we looked at Granville compared to all streets, all local streets within the city. But when we look at Granville just compared to all the surrounding neighborhood streets, so when we look at every local neighborhood street between Peterson and Devon, between Kedzie and Sheridan, we again see that Granville is way overrepresented in traffic crashes. When we consider Granville to the rest of those local streets, we see that Granville makes up about 11% of the street miles, 27% of the crashes happening on all those streets, and 47% of injuries from crashes are occurring on Granville. So out of all of the local streets, out of all the streets that aren't Devon, Peterson, Western, etc., half the people getting injured in traffic crashes, that's occurring on Granville. And when we look at vulnerable users, so people outside of cars most likely to be injured in traffic crashes, we see that those people are disproportionately harmed. So traffic crashes involving people walking and biking, they make up about 9% of all crashes on Granville, but they make up 43% of all crashes resulting in an injury. And when we look specifically at who's been injured and harmed in those crashes, we see nearly 30% of those are people under the age of 18. And we've seen victims as young as 10 years old being hit by cars. And we've seen a lot of those under 18 crashes and victims happening right outside of schools. Dave mentioned many of the schools nearby. We've seen crashes involving children near Haight, near Clinton, near Stone, all on Granville. And we've also seen another 10% of those victims over the age of 60, as high as age 70. And then when we compare Granville again to the local neighborhood street, we see that over half of all pedestrian and bicycle related crashes within that neighborhood, on those neighborhood streets, is happening on Granville. 43% of all pedestrian crashes in the neighborhood are happening on Granville. 68% of all bike crashes are happening on Granville. And then when we dig into who's causing these crashes, what we found is that in 88% of the time, in the most serious injury crashes, 88% of those drivers causing those crashes do not live in the neighborhood. They live outside of that neighborhood that I showed you earlier. And then over the last 5 years, we've also seen 30 hit and run crashes happening on Granville. That's 6 hit and run crashes every single year on Granville. Now, one reason why we're seeing so many crashes on Granville is simply the amount of cars on Granville. Like we've discussed, Granville is not an arterial street. It's not what you call a collector street. It is formally designated as a local residential street. It is simply not meant for the amount of traffic that it is carrying. And when you look at Granville compared to the other streets in the area and compared to other residential streets in the city, we see Granville has 2, 3, 4 times the amount of traffic every single day compared to all these other streets. So these numbers you're seeing are the average daily traffic. That is the average number of vehicles using the street every single day.
Between where and where?
Throughout the quarter, we've conducted multiple counts. And so with our counts, we've seen volumes between 6,000 and 8,000 on Granville. We've conducted multiple counts throughout the day, looking at 24 hours of vehicles.
So you're comparing numbers on Granville when your accident numbers, when you say neighborhood, you're comparing
We're comparing them to every single residential street.
But, okay, so.
These streets are only a few blocks.
Yeah, now, we will have plenty of time to answer questions and get into more details after the presentation. We have a hard stop at 7:30, so I'm going to continue so we can get through the presentation and we can have time for questions in the open house. And when we look at traffic speeds, again, what we found is that we've seen top speeds throughout the corridor from 45, 50, and 70 miles an hour throughout the day. These are deadly speeds happening on Granville, which is a local residential street. And when we think about traffic crashes and the likelihood of someone being killed in a traffic crash, the likelihood jumps exponentially the faster speeds go. So at 20 miles per hour, somebody hit by a vehicle has about a 10% chance of dying, a 90% chance of surviving. If you go up to 40 miles per hour and you are hit by a vehicle, you have a 20% chance of survival. So with all this happening, so many different destinations, so many different volumes, what we see is a really disorganized street. Whether it is at the busy intersections, whether it is at school, or whether it is folks driving home, what we're seeing is a lot of disorganization on Granville. And we're also seeing a lot of high volumes mixing with a narrow width that is causing some really staggering types of crashes. We're even seeing multiple head-on collisions happening on Granville. And when we talk about organization, the most important place for us to have a really organized, predictable traffic flow is at schools. Like we've talked about, we've got multiple schools on the corridor. We've talked to every school on the corridor. They tell us the same thing. Every single school tells us they are deeply concerned with student safety at pickup and drop-off time. They tell us about how disorganized and how crazy traffic is, and how concerned they are about safety every single day. And when you look at the crashes happening on Granville, 20% are happening during pickup and drop-off times. And like I said earlier, when we looked at crashes involving people walking and biking, multiple crashes, especially involving people under the age of 18, were happening outside of these schools. So Granville also just does not support the many different ways people are getting around. It's got great access to transit, whether it's the Red Line or Metra. We have a ton of people walking. We know that school boundaries cross major arterials. So we have families going from one side of a big intersection to another. We have a lot of people biking. And Granville is simply not supporting all the different ways that people are using it. I highlighted 2/3 of all bike crashes within the neighborhood on those local streets are happening on Granville. And there's a reason for that. Granville is a very popular east-west route, but it's really the only route that provides access from to the lakeshore, to the lakefront, Lakeshore Trail, to transit to the North Branch Trail. So when you look at our bike network, and here's our neighborhood, and you start looking at these major land use barriers that really break down the network, what we have is a 2-mile gap between designated bike routes from Berwyn to the south, south of Rose Hill Cemetery, and Pratt to the north. Those are our only 2 designated bike routes in this neighborhood that get you east and west. And then when you look at all the other street connectivity on other local streets, Granville is the only one that actually connects through. And we're seeing a lot of folks using it already because it's the only one that really serves that purpose. We're not seeing folks biking on Peterson, which is 4 lanes wide, carries a ton of traffic. We're also not seeing folks biking on Devon, which carries nearly the amount of traffic as Peterson, but is much narrower. And after we look at all this data, we simply cannot address traffic safety on Granville, but within the neighborhood as a whole without addressing Granville. So Dave mentioned earlier, even if you don't live on Granville, you likely rely on it and use it. But if you live in the neighborhood, even if you don't live in Granville, you should care about all of these numbers that I've told you. Such a share of the crashes happening on these neighborhood streets are happening on Granville. And there's no way to address traffic safety in the entire neighborhood before addressing Granville. So Dave highlighted a little bit of our goals for our project. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of our proposals. And I'll use that word again. These are proposals. These are very much still under design, and we want to hear all of your feedback, good and bad, about what we're presenting. And so when you look at the goals that Dave presented, we've got basically strategies that come to each of those goals. So how do we get less trips on Granville? How do we get those non-local trips that don't need to be on Granville on the busier streets where they should be? And so what we're looking at is some small changes at targeted blocks to reconfigure the street network to maintain local access but keep discouraging longer trips. Safer speeds, we're looking at providing traffic calming throughout the neighborhood, and we don't have those locations identified. We want to hear from you where you have issues, where you have struggles using Granville to help us target those locations. Everything that we're proposing is really meant to also just provide better organization and predictability for those who are on Granville. Again, we've had a lot of conversations with schools around their pickup and drop-off operations and how our proposals can better formalize the types of behaviors they want to see. And then enhancing access, making sure that Granville is a community street, a street that whether you're walking, you're biking, you're rolling, you're going to school, you're going to transit, or you're driving, it works for everyone. So reconfiguring the streets. So what we have here over in the open house, we have concepts for 4 different intersections: Western, Ridge, Clark, and Broadway. And we want to get your feedback on those. But what we are proposing is small 1 or 2 block sections where we are changing the designation from 2-way to 1-way. And Dave mentioned earlier that Granville is a 3-mile street that is 2-way the entire stretch. That is basically unheard of in terms of local residential streets that go that long without changing direction. You go to any other street, whether it's Granville or Rockwell or Campbell, those streets change width, they change 2-way, they go to 1-way, they switch to the other 1-way. What we're talking about is not any different than what we see on a lot of other streets. I see your hand, and we're going to get to comments and questions after this. Sure.
Was there a separation between looking at the bicycling from Pratt to the lakefront and the safety on Granville? That they could be 2 separate issues, that you could ride a bicycle on Pratt to Ridge, to Ardmore to get to the lake, and not have this?
So,
They are 2 completely separate problems.
yeah, so like I said, we do have bike lanes on Pratt. But we have a 2-mile gap between other bike routes. So if you live a mile south of Pratt, there's no way you're going to ride up to Pratt to go east and west. It's the same as we don't.
Why
Well,
not go on those quieter streets?
All right, I'm gonna continue. Like we've said, we have a short amount of time here. I'm gonna work through my presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end.
Answer the question whether you looked at this.
Thank you. So, like I said, we have concepts for 4 intersections. I'm going to walk you through one of those intersections, which is Clark, just to give you an idea of the things that we are considering and proposing. And you'll be able to see the rest of the intersections over here on the boards. So like I said, these are short stretches of Granville. We're looking at designating to a 1-way street. Now, these intersections we selected were not arbitrary. They were looked at based on traffic volumes, based on turning movements at intersections, looking at the number of vehicles continuing through the intersection versus turning onto and off of, looking at crash data, looking at and discussing traffic operations with schools. And I'll also highlight all of these changes that we're talking about are being coordinated with emergency services as well. So again, at Clark and Granville, like no other intersection really on the corridor, I think, highlights just the disorganization and the need for better organization than this one. We have, even though Clark has a traffic signal, the Haight School still has crossing guards there to help families and folks walk across the street. And so what we're proposing is converting the single block on each side of Granville to a one-way directed towards Granville. Now what this does is, one, this simplifies a lot of the turning movements happening at that intersection. And two, this also continues to provide access outside of the neighborhood, whether you're heading north or south on Clark.
Where did the one-way start?
You'll be able to see on all of our boards there, but generally it is 1 or 2 blocks from the intersection. Yeah. Also, improved traffic flow. I know we've heard a lot of folks at some of these intersections just talking about the amount of queuing and the amount of cars stacking up at the intersection. So looking at things like adding dedicated left and right turns so that the traffic that is exiting the neighborhood is doing so in a more orderly fashion. We're looking at, again, a new bike connection to allow biking in both directions, so that we're formalizing that movement that so many people are already doing on Granville, which is biking east and west.
So the biking is not one way, or is it?
The biking would be, two-way biking would be allowed the entire stretch of Granville. And the other thing we're looking at all of these intersections is what we can do to calm traffic and shorten pedestrian crossings. So at Clark, we're looking at new curb extensions, larger refuge islands to provide better space to be more visible as you cross the street, and shorten the amount of exposure that you have to motor vehicles and moving traffic. So at Granville and Clark, I'll highlight the Haight School, which is just a block over. And what this proposal does is actually formalize the exact kinds of movements and behavior and operations that they want to see when it comes to pickup and drop-off. This formalizes and eliminates cars dropping off on the other side of the street and having their kids cross moving traffic to come to the school. This allows basically kind of a circular path. What they prefer is drop-offs on Granville in the morning, and then pickups on Thome, which is 1 block up on the north. And so what this does is allow traffic to get to school from either some other part of Granville to the east, or from Greenview or another north-south street, and then drop off right there at the school, and then exit out to Clark. And safer speeds. So what I highlighted earlier, that we want to hear your experience and how you use the street and what kinds of challenges you have. Like I said, we are looking to prioritize traffic calming throughout the corridor, and we want to do so at places where we are hearing from you. And so we're looking at possible things like curb extensions, which you see on the left, traffic circles, which there are a few examples of in the neighborhood, possibly raised crosswalks. CDOT as a department has really made an effort to prioritize things like raised crosswalks at schools, parks, and other places where we see a lot of vulnerable users. So that is certainly an option, as well as smoother speed humps. So what we're proposing and what we could include are things that we call sinusoidal speed humps. They are far smoother than a typical speed hump, which is, we all know them, they're just a lump of asphalt on the street. What these are designed for a car to drive over them at about 15 miles per hour. So it is not a start-stop. It is more of encouraging a much smoother and slower, more appropriate speed on the streets. And like I said, we're also looking at formalizing Granville as a bike route, again, because so many people are already using it. It is really the only east-west street for 2 miles that gets you to many of the popular destinations people are using on bike. So connecting folks from the North Shore Channel Trail to transit and ultimately to the Lakefront Trail via existing bike lanes on Kinmore and Winthrop. And so last, I know that we've got a lot of people here, and I know for a lot of you this is the first time seeing these proposals. But we've talked to a ton of people over the last few months, including our local elected officials, the fire department, many of the schools on the street, a number of the block clubs, Loyola University as well. But tonight we're really here just to talk to you. We want to listen and hear your questions. And so I'm
You
good.
really didn't talk to the block clubs on a block club by block club level. You talked to some representatives of them. But
So
we-
now
we have a lot of-
Now is your opportunity to talk to us.
Block club meeting, please. Can you come to our block club meeting next Monday night?
Hey, excuse me, guys. I said it at the beginning, Brad said it a second time, so maybe the third time's the charm. Let's just stop with the shouting out things, let them get through the last slide or two, and we've got a ton of information over here, so we can talk with everyone and have an informed conversation. Otherwise, we're just wasting everybody's time, okay? Thank you.
So, as I said, tonight we are here to listen, and we will do that after I finish my presentation. And we want to know your experience using Granville. We have hundreds of comment cards. We have a box all the way in the corner labeled comments. Please drop them there. We want you to put comments directly on the sheets, on the plots, on the Post-its. Please, if you have something to say, record it and write it down. And we, based on everything we've seen, we have a real sense of urgency to act and to address a lot of these issues that we're seeing in the neighborhood and on Granville. And so after tonight, we're going to be compiling everything that we've heard, everything that we've learned, and we're going to work together with the wards and our elected officials to kind of determine the next steps in those conversations. We don't know, there may be another big meeting like this. It may be targeted conversations at a ward by ward or a block by block level. But please stay tuned to each ward for that later. Now, like I said, these are proposals. We are still taking your feedback. We hope to work through project design by early 2025, and we are aiming to look at implementing something in summer of 2025. Now, last, we are providing a lot of opportunity for you to provide comments, but we also will accept emails at our complete streets at cityofchicago.org email address. And we also will be posting everything you see, the presentation, the boards, the plots, all of it online at chicago.gov/complete streets. That should be up in the next day or two. And with that, I thank you for listening to our presentation. We're going to break and provide an opportunity for you to look into more detail at each proposal. Sir?
Could I ask you, could you take one map and go back on the map that had the streets with the different arrows on it?
Sure.
And just take one intersection at Clark and Granville, keep going back, yes, stop there. And kind of say what you mean by that, what happens. You showed the intersection.
Yep.
The cars would be going like this, and
Yes.
like this, and like this, and like this. But where would they be coming from?
Yep. So what you're seeing here, and this will be the last bit before we break up, is that everywhere that you see an arrow here, that would be converted, that block of Granville would be converted to a one-way street pointing towards the arrow. So
For one block, anyway.
for one block, yes. And with that, thank you very much.